Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. You can unmute if you want to hit yes in the chat, that works too. Just want to make sure my audio is working here. I am coming to you live from Paoli Junior Senior High School, and I just want to make sure everything's working for us. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you for your patience. I apologize for the couple minutes late start, but let's get into it. So a couple things before we get started. If you could make sure that everyone is on mute. There will definitely be opportunities to ask questions and participate, but it'll also help everyone kind of concentrate and all of that if we can make sure everyone else is muted for the time being. And then the chat box is open, so as you think of them, if you have questions, definitely feel free to enter them in the chat box. We've got Mary Baker Budisa, Project Success Project Manager. She'll be kind of monitoring that chat box for me to make sure I don't miss anything. What else? I think we can get into it. Okay, so this today is the Project Success Open Office Hours for our recorded webinar that we released a couple weeks ago on communication, and it was titled No Mode of Communication Explained, but honestly a lot of the things that we talked about in it were more broadly about communication in general, so it wasn't meant to be targeted specifically at students with no identified mode of communication. If you had a chance to watch that recorded webinar, great, you're a step ahead. If you haven't yet had a chance to watch it, but you wanted to hop on today anyway, no problem. We can get the link out to you just as an additional resource for you, and you'll still be able to learn some things today and ask questions. So let's move ahead. Miss Mary, can you advance the slide? There we go. All right, real quickly, just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the Indiana Resource Network. We never miss an opportunity to make sure that teachers and administrators are aware of all the resources that are out there in Indiana. So Project Success is just one of those resource centers that's part of the larger Indiana Resource Network. But there's a bunch of other resource centers there as well. Today we have a couple of folks from Patents joining us. They are another resource center, part of the Indiana Resource Network. So truly just want to make sure everyone is aware of the Indiana Resource Network. The icons there give you an example of how many there are, but if you're interested in learning about the names of those resource centers and a description of what they actually do, there's a link there on the slides, the hyperlinks, or you can go to the DOE's website and just type IRN in the search bar, and it'll pull up that list of the resource centers and a description of what they do. Go ahead and advance. This slide just tells you a little bit about Project Success. If you aren't familiar with us already, there's a link to our website right underneath our logo, projectsuccessindiana.com. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over this, but just want you guys to be able to see our goal is to bring as much information as possible in as many different ways as possible, specifically related to supporting teachers and administrators of students with more significant disabilities. So that just sort of illustrates all the different ways that we try to do that. And I mentioned we have some Patents friends joining us today, so I wanted to make sure that everyone had the availability to access their website as well. Patents is a fantastic resource for, specifically they do a lot of great work about assistive technology, accessible materials, universal design for learning, and actually I'll let these guys kind of speak to that a little more here later, but just wanted to call out that they're here with us today to help support this discussion, and I included a few of the links there as well for you all to be able to access. All right, let's get into it. So to set the stage just a little bit, wanted to sort of point out that, and if you know anything about Project Success or have been to any of our trainings before, we always try to anchor what we're talking about in the ideas that have come across to us from the Every Student Succeeds Act and then the accompanying Dear Colleague letter. Those are some pretty big pieces of federal guidance that had some common themes that are listed there to the left: shared responsibility, high expectations, meaningful access, and grade level standards. What I'll say is today, with our topic being communication, student communication, I would say this is where meaningful access comes into play a lot. For students to be able to have a meaningful mode of communication or way to communicate is really going to be able to impact their ability to access the curriculum, the content, the standards, the setting, everything about gen ed. So that's really where we're going to sort of focus a lot of our conversation today. But of course, the other three of those elements also come into play as well. We're obviously holding students to high expectations. When we have sort of this expectation that we're going to work on identifying modes of communication and help students access those, it's obviously going to be able to provide students access to those grade level standards. And then the shared responsibility piece is huge. We know now we're no longer in this world of special ed teachers do special ed things with special ed students, and then gen ed teachers do gen ed things with gen ed students. We're really blurring those lines. And in doing that, the responsibility is also being blurred now and shared. So special ed teachers are supporting gen ed teachers and vice versa. And that applies to this idea of communication as well. So just wanted to sort of set the stage there. And we'll go on and look at why this idea of access is so important. So a little access goes a long way. Whether we're talking about physical access to a setting, whether we're talking about intellectual access to content or curriculum, whether we're talking about the ability to access the community, right, society via communication. Access is where it all starts, being able to provide that access, because then students are able to participate. They're able to engage in what's going on around them, and then it's from that participation that we can really enhance their learning. So it all starts with access, and communication is just one way that we're going to be doing that or focusing on that today. Again, just to sort of set the stage a little bit, IDOE, the guidance that they have as far as communication for students, I've sort of highlighted some areas there, some sentences there. All attempts should be made to find a mode of communication as soon as he or she is enrolled. We shouldn't be waiting for, I think a lot of times we discover perhaps that a student is considered to have no identified mode of communication via the assessment, because and so that's in grade 3, right? But we could be working on communication long, long before that. So we really need to be making all attempts to be doing that as soon as possible. And then secondly, best practice would indicate that students are entering kindergarten with a communication system. Now, if you have students who haven't gotten to that point, that doesn't mean we're going to throw up our hands and say, well, I didn't meet that guideline or whatever, I guess we just give up. Of course, we're going to still pursue identifying a mode of communication, but these are sort of the guidelines that are set forth by the DOE. All right, so this is really where I personally have sort of connected to the whole idea of communication being such a large piece of having high expectations for students with disabilities and all of that. It's really, really an eye-opener to understand that not being able to speak is not the same thing as not having anything to say. And I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here a bit, and I understand that, but to be able to articulate to others around us as well, I think is really important. Just because a student is not able to physically speak with a voice doesn't mean, with their own voice, I should say, coming out of their own body, that doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say. So what we're going to be talking about today is ways of accessing that voice that they have and being able to have that student share what they want to say. So this goes right along with it. I think it's so easy for teachers to give up. They try to identify a mode of communication. They try this strategy. They try this. They try this. And they either give up or they don't quite let it go long enough. And maybe they're also missing some signs, right? So this sort of quote or this statement really goes to the heart of that, which is we have to be recognizing and then consistently reinforcing when students with significant disabilities are making those attempts to communicate. Because if we don't, the alternative then, right, sort of the end outcome is that student just kind of gives up. Why am I even going to try to communicate with my utterances, with my body movements, with my eyes? Why am I even trying? Because no one's paying attention. No one's noticing that I'm trying to say something. So this statement is really just put there to kind of call all of us as educators back to that idea of being intentional about recognizing and then reinforcing attempts to communicate. So Understanding language. This is another thing that was sort of a light bulb moment for me to think about the difference between language and communication, and then thinking about how those things develop and how we learn to understand those things, right? So language develops through experiencing the world, and all of our students, regardless of the significance or the severity of their disability, they are experiencing the world, right? But the educators that surround them are sort of the gatekeepers of those experiences. So again, I'm going to keep referring back to that idea of being intentional. So we as educators, we need to be sure that we are intentional about providing those experiences and not artificially restricting those experiences that our students with the most significant disabilities are having. And of course, as we're understanding or developing our language, we usually are understanding a lot more language, a lot more words than when we first start saying our first words. And the same is often true for our students with significant disabilities. They could be understanding a lot, but perhaps just not able to sort of say back to us that they understand, right? So that's an important idea to keep in mind. I'm not going to read through all of these. I kept this in just to be a sort of a reference for everyone to think about. These are some of the ways that we can help enhance or develop understanding of language. Obviously, providing the opportunities, again, we don't want to artificially restrict. And then you can see, I'm not going to read it, but these are all really important ways that you can make sure that you're sort of supporting the development of understanding language in your students. Supporting communication through language. Again, these are more like strategies, again, thinking about the idea of the difference between communication and language, right? You can use language to communicate, but you can also communicate in other ways, right, outside of language. So this is just sort of bringing the two together. The wait time, that first bullet point there, that is something that I'll spend just a second on. I think it's so important to remember the importance of giving ample wait time to students. I think all good educators know you need to provide wait time. But I think providing enough wait time is something that maybe doesn't happen. We all have things to do. This lesson's got to end so we can get to the next thing. It's almost time for lunch. We got to go. And so that wait time shrinks. But a couple things happen when we shrink that wait time. One, we're sort of lowering our expectations for our students because now we're saying, whatever it is that you're going to say, we don't have time for that, right? Or we got to get going. But when we provide that wait time, what we're indicating to students is, I believe you have something of value to say, and I'm going to give you time to say it, right? But that piece of asking once and then waiting, or giving the direction once and then waiting, it's so easy to, in an attempt to try to assist students, right? We're trying to be good educators and prompt, right? We're going to prompt. Maybe they didn't understand me the first time, or maybe they didn't hear what I said or didn't understand. I'm going to prompt them. Man, when you do that, what you've done is start that processing process all over again. So if they had gotten 50% of the way through, right, imagine the little bar on your computer of like a download and the progress that the download is making. They've gotten 50% of the way through processing your question or your direction, and then you prompt them. They have to go all the way back to zero and start processing again. So, man, what a lot of work that is, right? So we want to kind of try to avoid that as much as possible. That's all I'll say about wait time. You can read through those other strategies too. This, I think, is just, again, another sort of a stopping point for us to stop and think a minute and understand. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So when we're trying to work on communication with students, it's not going to be, in most cases, a switch that is flipped and then, now the communication is there and we can all move on, right? It's going to be, for most students, a long haul. And in this sort of scenario, calls attention to that. So if you think about how typical language is developed, we are all surrounded by language all the time, right? And like it says there in the middle, we bombard infants with language. But during that time, before they start talking, we don't expect them to talk, right? You don't expect a 1-month-old to talk. You don't expect a 5-month-old to talk necessarily or whatever. So you don't expect that out of them. And it's the same for our students when we're working on developing their language and developing their communication. Well, this is more so related to language, but it's okay if it takes time for these things to develop, right? That doesn't mean that there's nothing going on inside that student. They could be putting the pieces together, but it's just not being shown on the outside. So, and that's okay. This slide is here to tell you it's okay. If you're not seeing the progress that you're looking for, don't give up, right? Now, that's not to say that you have data that supports that something isn't working and you might need to try something else. I'm not saying just grind that one strategy into the ground forever, but don't give up is what I'm saying. So a couple different things that we think about when we're thinking about more specifically for our students who are working on developing their communication. AAC, augmentative and alternative communications, that's a way a lot of our students are going to be able to access their means, their mode of communication. These are just a couple different sort of definitions and ways of defining what AAC is, but excuse me, go ahead and go on to the next slide, Mary, so we can look at the fiction and facts. I found this to be a really useful slide just in terms of someone who didn't have all the expertise about AAC, what's sort of generally accepted practice versus, well, we sort of think this way, but actually that's not how it should actually go, right? So this is a helpful chart for me to see and look through to understand things like providing a student a device decreases the motivation to work on speech. Absolutely not. That's just not true. And so as we travel the state in the trainings that we do for Project Success, these are the kinds of things that we're still hearing from teachers, you know, like, oh man, if we give them this device, well, they're not gonna wanna try to, you know, work on their speech at all. Well, that's just not true. I'm going to, just for a moment here, yes, I think this is a good time to do it. I'm gonna open it up to our patent friends. I know we have a couple on the line and I won't call you out unless you wanna be called out. But this would be a great time to pop in with any specific information you want to share about AAC or just sort of your own thoughts and viewpoint on why it's so important.
Hi, I'll go ahead and unmute myself. I'm here with David Jackson, who is our newest AAC specialist slash assistant director, and Daniel McNulty is also here, our director. And so thank you for having us. I just wanted to reaffirm everything that you just said, and probably one of the things for people who are, you know, somewhat AAC competent or familiar with AAC, oftentimes when we hear things like the student should have an AAC system before they reach kindergarten, absolutely. But when we say AAC system, that doesn't necessarily mean a device. So the definitions that you quoted talked about it's a system of strategies and techniques. So perhaps ecosystem is a better word than system. We're talking about all the things that we use to communicate. It's not an iPad with an app. It's not a dedicated device.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of.
Oh, I'm so glad you made that point. Yeah. And I think I even slide back into that thinking AAC is a device, right? But there's sort of a spectrum, really, of moving up to maybe the most technological of things. I'm so glad you pointed that out.
And it's not even like moving up to. Some of the most fluent AAC users do not use a device. It's not the best or most appropriate way for them to communicate.
Right.
So
right.
There's
good
not
point.
that continuum of we start with low tech, and then if you get good or you're not good at it, then you get to move to mid tech. There's not that continuum.
Right.
But we all, I mean,
yeah.
you and I, we are multimodal communicators, and we use a lot of different techniques and strategies and tools to do that. And so do our students with complex communication needs.
Yep. I love it. Would you say that, so I'm asking this question because I just ended a training with a group here in Paoli, and we talked a lot about the continuum of services and how it's not an either or. Either a student is 100% in gen ed, or they have their needs met in a self-contained setting, but that's it, right? There's only two options. There's really this continuum. Would you say that maybe that's sort of in alignment with the idea of AAC too?
Absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to the ecosystem. If you only have one option, you're not going to be an effective communicator. Same for anyone else. So looking at the features and what does that student want to communicate, what does that student need to be able to do to participate is going to lead you to those features of that communication ecosystem.
Awesome. Thank you. I know my next couple of slides, several slides actually, have more to do with core vocabulary, which I don't want to necessarily say is the same thing as communication, right? Two things are sort of merging here, the idea of communicating and then the idea of developing language. So, but I do think I'm so so stuck on the importance of core vocabulary for those students who are working on developing language. Is there anything you want to say about core vocabulary?
Oh gosh. So core vocabulary has been around for a really long time, and it's that idea of exactly what you said on the slide. I don't want to repeat what you were going to say, but so it's this idea that there's a small set of words in the English language that make up the vast majority of what we want to say. So like you said, big, little, give, eat, go, you. You can use those words all day long. So I think for some students, this can be a really, if I'm going to work on one word and we can work on go, I can use go all day long versus goldfish cracker. Goldfish cracker might be a fantastic word to work on, and that might be a super motivating, wonderful word,
Right.
but not necessarily something I can work on all day, every day.
Nor do you necessarily walk up to someone and just communicate to them by saying goldfish cracker, unless you want a goldfish cracker, right?
Exactly.
You can only say so much about a goldfish cracker, yeah.
Absolutely. But at the same point, when we think about what are the first words we need to work on, it may not be a core vocabulary word. Again, looking at what or what things does that student need to participate in, it's going to give you a much better idea what language, how are we going to organize it, how are they going to get to those words. So again, not core vocabulary being a wonderful thing and really important to keep in mind, but it's not all core or all fringe words or those nouns. It's what does the student need to say? How can they participate?
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, so if there is anyone who isn't familiar with the idea of core vocabulary, the slide that's up there right now does just give sort of that basic definition. It's really sort of they're like building blocks of being able to communicate many things in many different ways. And the example that a lot of times that I give is, I think more traditionally when we're working on developing language, a lot of times we have wanted students to be able to name things and identify things, chair, desk, apple, cat, whatever. And those, like you were saying, just because those are important words, and if that's what they're needing to communicate about, then maybe that is the words that we need to be teaching. Those are the words we need to be teaching them. But if we are thinking about sort of getting the most bang for our buck in other ways, right, being able to communicate multiple things, no one is going to walk up to anyone else and say apple, table, chair, cat. Like that doesn't communicate anything, right? So while those nouns have purpose, it may not have the purpose that we're looking for. And so that's where core vocabulary comes in, to be able to sort of build your own meaning, right, depending on what core words you have. So Mary, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just one example of understanding how flexible core vocabulary can be, as opposed to, like Jessica mentioned, the goldfish cracker, right? It's not super flexible to be able to use that word. But for instance, the word different can mean many different, no pun intended, things. There's 5 things going around there, right? That when you're saying something is different, you might mean that it's new, or that it is dissimilar, unequal. You might be subtracting, right? There's where some academics come in, or that it's just strange, right? But different can mean so many different things. And that's a key sort of just illustration of how flexible core vocabulary can be, as opposed to using some of those really narrow words. Mary, go ahead and go to the next one. This is illustrating the idea that core vocabulary can be used across settings, right? Again, with the flexibility piece. So turn can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used with those contexts that are listed down the side, and then what might it be? You're turning a page, it's someone's turn in a game, and so forth. But man, that's one word, right, that you can be working on, but then the student is able to sort of apply it in all these different settings. So I just think that those couple of examples are pretty powerful in terms of demonstrating how flexible and how, what do I want to say, how powerful, truly how powerful it can be. These few words really have a lot of impact when students are working on those. Mary, go ahead and go to the last one. I don't want to spend too much more time on this. Yeah, so using just a few words, this is where the idea of sort of the building blocks, right? If those 3 words in the box, go, like, and not, you can be doing a lot of different things with just those words. Those bolded words underneath, refuse, be social, obtain, share info, those are purposes of communication, right? So we might communicate because we're trying to refuse something. We might communicate because we want to be social, and so forth. And just with those 3 words, students are able to sort of engage in all those different purposes for communication. I just think that's a really, it's strong, it's powerful for students to be able to access communication in that way with just those few words. Rather than having to teach them a whole set of words or a whole thing, they can start engaging in a lot that's going on around them with just those few words. And that's all I'll say about core vocabulary. I could probably go on forever. Let's see, does anyone have questions, anyone on the line, about specifically anything to do with AAC, anything to do with core vocabulary, anything sort of in that realm before I turn it to this idea of assessment? I appreciate our Patents friends. If for those of you who are listening but maybe not noticing the chat box, our Patents friends are including some comments over there off to the side as well. So we've got multiple modalities going on even today, right, with the audio, and then you can also be seeing some of those comments to the side as well. All right, well, definitely pop in. Anyone who has questions that come to mind about AAC, core vocabulary, anything related to that, put your question in the chat box, or even just a comment, an experience that you've had with those. Be happy to hear it. All right, let's talk assessment. So students who either in practice, right, and on a day-to-day basis truly have a mode of communication that has not yet been identified, or that you're really working on identifying that mode of communication, they are still expected to participate in the assessment, at least in that initial stage. But then we also have sort of this designation of no mode of communication that is specific to the assessment. So I also have on the line today Stephanie Thompson, who is our alternate assessment specialist at the DOE. And I brought her along just to make sure if there were any questions that people had specifically about students who either have no identified mode of communication or really working on identifying that mode of communication, what that looks like for them to participate in the assessment. So if anyone listening has questions about that, I'm going to give you a moment as I sort of continue on with this slide here, but definitely please put your questions in the chat box. Any questions for Stephanie related to no mode and IM participation? One thing I'll say, and then I'll let Stephanie have a chance to sort of expand on this, the procedure for noting whether a student is considered to have no mode of communication for the assessment is changing for this school year. So I'll let Stephanie speak to that a little bit. There will be specific guidance located in the testing manual. But one key point that I really want to make sure everyone hears is that for the purposes of the assessment, a student refusing to answer, we all know we have those students who are like, I'm not having any of this, right? I am not answering. That is not the same thing, and we can't consider that to be the same thing as no observable mode of communication for the assessment, right? They can absolutely communicate, they're just refusing to do so. That's very different. So just wanted to point that out. I'm going to point out the other couple of things on this slide, and then I'll open it up to Stephanie. So actually, let me just let Stephanie do it. Steph, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Do you want to talk about the new guidance document that you all have put out about the stimulus and response materials and allowable response methods and all of that? Steph, are you there? Did we lose you? All right, let me come back to Stephanie. All right, let's keep chugging along here. Beth, we'll try to get back to you in a second. Mary, could you work and see if you're able to unmute her? I'm not sure if it was, oh, Stephanie, are you there? All right, we'll move on. No worries, can't hear you, babe, but we'll come back to you. All right, let's keep going here. So Mary, go ahead and advance the slide one. I know, I'm multitasking here. Okay, so this is, again, I put these slides in throughout just as sort of stopping points to really wrap up the big ideas that we're talking about. There's no more important educational outcome than that of communication for students with significant cognitive or now to align with them as we're referring to intellectual disabilities, right? But this quote comes from NCSIC, a NCSIC brief that was a few years ago. But it really just sort of summarizes the importance of everything we're talking about today, that if nothing else comes from a student's educational experience, if we're able to establish communication for that student, that's huge, right? Because that impacts their participation in life for the rest of their life. So,
Ashley, are you able to hear me now?
Oh, I hear you, Stephanie. Hello.
Okay. Sorry, I just had to call back in. I was talking, but apparently you all couldn't hear me, so sorry about that.
No. Oh, that's okay. That's all right. All right, Mary, can you pop back to the I am slide for a second? And I want to give Stephanie the chance to talk about all the response methods that are allowed on the assessment, and then the guidance document that's linked over there to the side.
Well, I don't think I'd be able to share all of them, but definitely refer to the document that's posted on our website. It basically has different ways that test administrators can adapt the assessment based on characteristics of students. So it would, for example, give different ways that you might work with students taking IEM, for example, if they had low vision or if they were blind. And so it's put together as a chart with lots of different ideas. And we've been sharing the Office of Student Assessment. We've been kind of traveling the last couple of weeks, visiting with test coordinators. And this is something that I've been encouraging them to make sure to share with all of you, because I think some of these ideas, if they are implemented in the classroom now, then students will feel really comfortable with those strategies during the assessment.
That is a really good point. These are not necessarily things that should just come up at assessment time and then go away, that they should have access to this all year round. I think, yeah, so I included that box with some of the allowable response methods and then the link to that document, because I think there is sometimes either a misunderstanding or just we don't quite think about it, that there are so many different ways that a student could be responding to the assessment that are allowed, even if it's not what we would consider to be traditional or maybe what's acceptable, right, on the assessment. So it's okay for students to use a response card, for instance, to indicate their response to a question on the assessment. It's okay to have a switch involved with their communication to indicate their answers on the assessment. I think sometimes teachers get so almost paralyzed, right, paralyzed by the gravity of the standardized assessment, right, that they don't want to do anything wrong, they don't want to do anything that's not allowed. And so I just wanted to take this moment to make sure everyone knew that there are there's quite a variety of ways that students can be engaging in and responding to the assessment. So that link there off to the right is that document that Stephanie was referring to, the chart. So you can take a look at that if you have any questions about that. Stephanie is definitely the expert on that. And does anyone have questions related to the assessment and communication? We're good.
I will say, Ashley,
Right.
I know you mentioned that the process for identification
Yes.
is changing. It's not. It's pretty similar. The only thing that really is different this year is that instead of having a separate practice test, we embedded our practice items into the operational assessment. So last year, if you are familiar with the assessment and you gave IEM last year and you had students with no mode of communication, you would have seen the students would have taken the 2 practice items, and then there would have been 2 proxy items for test administrators where they would have to respond either yes or no if students participated. And if they weren't able to communicate, they would indicate no response for the student. So the only change is that instead of having to mark those proxy items as no response, you just mark the practice test items as no response. So it's still the 5 questions, and then after those 5 are marked as no response, the test will close. So the test administrator will be walked through that process of closing the test for that student, and then they will be reported as having no mode of communication. And sorry about my dog barking in the background.
Got it. Thank you. Yes, that's important to note. So it's not necessarily like the criteria for a student being identified as no mode of communication is changing, but just sort of the way that it is occurring within the testing system is a little bit different.
Right.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. I haven't seen any other questions about the assessment pop up in the box, so we'll just keep rolling along here. We talked about that. Absolutely. There's no more important educational outcome than that of communication. Mary, go ahead and just keep rolling here. Yeah. So I want to briefly just share all these additional resources and then truly open it up for any additional just sort of random floater questions about any of these topics. So these additional resources that are here, go ahead and flip to the first slide. We've got a spread the word from the IDOE that is specifically targeting communication. That was from September. So we've included the link there. We've also got the memo from the DOE in July, specifically just sort of addressing that idea of reviewing the students who had been identified with no mode of communication on the assessment. We've got a specific link here, and I know it was included on that original slide for patents as well, that'll take you to the patents lending library. So that's where you can borrow devices, software, just all sorts of things, which is amazing that it's available to you at no cost, shipped to you at no cost. You can return it at no cost and really get your hands on these things to try them out with students and find something that works. I just think I can't emphasize that enough, that that's an amazing resource. And if you're not sure what you need, the folks at Patents are great at sort of guiding you through, what are the needs of the student? I know this device might be a great match for that. They have all of that down pat. So if you're thinking about a student who's either not yet identified that mode of communication, working on developing it, you want to try something new to sort of expand or enhance, definitely check that out and reach out to Patents for that. Mary, go ahead and flip to the next one. These are just some things that I came across, and I'll open it up if people who are a little bit more familiar with them than I am. Looking at you, Jessica, and Daniel, and David. That are some resources that sort of address these ideas of communication and utilizing AAC and then core vocabulary. So just always I'm trying to get as much information out there as possible, different resources. Do any of you guys, you patent folks, do you have anything to say about those resources? Have you found them to be useful? Would you steer clear? Is there a better one that might take its place?
No, those are 3 great resources. I want to say in particular, Project Core down at the bottom, that website and the resources from the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies is Karen Erickson jokes, it's kind of like AAC 101, like you get a new student and you have no idea where to start. They have a wonderful little tool where you just answer yes, no questions about, can my student point? Does my student have, vision that they can see a symbol? Does my student have the physical ability to, point to a 2x2 square, those sorts of questions. And then it spits out to you a bunch of files that you can just print and start using right away. So it's not meant to be the AAC system forever, but it's a really great way to just get started. If hey, today is the best day yesterday was the best day to get started. Today is the second best day. So get something on the board around those, first 36 best core words to start out with, or their best guess based on their research, the best 36 words to start with. And then the Every Move Counts at the top. We have the entire manual you can borrow from Patents Lending Library. We recommend it a lot, especially for those students where you don't necessarily know. They're probably communicating things to you, but we aren't necessarily good about seeing it. So this is a really great systematic assessment to teach your team what are some intentional or unintentional things that your student is communicating? What communicative behaviors do they have? And how can we build upon that to get conventional communication?
I love that so much because I think, most everyone I think is on board with, yes, we want our students to be able to communicate, and whether it's through a device or PECs or this or that, yes, okay. But then those students that have sort of the most significant needs of the most significant needs, right, that some people just sort of give up or like, we're at a loss. Like, literally, what do we do? And I think this is where that comes into play, right? Literally every move is communicating something, like you said, whether it's intentional or not. I think it's just huge to be able to sort of hone in on those and see what you can build off of from there. So
David just added the link to the communication matrix, which I would definitely add to that slide. It is a fantastic free resource for teens, for students who have communication skills that's roughly below what we would expect a typical 24-month-old to be able to have. So if they aren't putting multiple words together for multiple reasons, and it's a really great way to kind of see what that looks like. And if you go to that website that David posted, they just did a wonderful series on using the communication matrix, the report that it spits out to you when you answer these yes/no questions. And it's available in multiple languages as well, which I think is awesome. That report, how can you use that in an IEP to make sure all of your team members and family understand what are we working on, where does this language occur, how can we make sure that we're addressing all of these functions of communication beyond just what do I want at snack time.
That's key. Yes, I will. I made a note here that I will add the communication matrix to that slide for future use. That's perfect. Thank you. Mary, go ahead and flip to the next slide. This is sort of, so for those of you that watch the recorded webinar, you'll notice that this presentation we're going through right now is sort of a hodgepodge combination of the slides from that. So I had also included in there additional links that are more specific to AAC. So just wanted to point out that that's still in there if you want to be able to access those links via this presentation as well. But as far as I'm concerned, that brings me to the end of all the sort of main points that I wanted to touch on. Mary, go ahead. I'll say this. Flip to here. Be thinking, everyone who's on, if you have any questions, be thinking of them because, yes, Mary, you're reading my mind. I wanted to sort of give those couple advertisements here right at the end while people are thinking of their questions. So, of course, we are currently discussing the communication piece. You'll see that's our second webinar of this school year that we're having our office hours for now, but we've got two more coming up. One on IEP goal writing aligned to content connectors that has been pre-recorded and it'll be released in January. And then a couple weeks after that, near the end of January, we'll have another office hours, exactly what we're doing here, only to discuss the ideas of goal writing aligned to content connectors. And then even more excitingly, the fourth webinar that we're going to do is sort of a TBD, to be determined by you all. So we're really, we're taking feedback from the field. And if you're subscribed to the Project Success newsletter, we have a link in there this go round that will, if you have an idea for a webinar, you're like, I really want to know about this. I'm looking everywhere. I don't really see a great resource on this. There's a form, a link to a form there that you can give your input about. I'd really like to see this last webinar target this topic. And then we'll do that. We'll record it, and then we'll have office hours for that too. So just wanted to point out that that's there. And then the very last slide is just our contact information. Wanted to make sure you all had that. We're more than happy to help via email, hop on a call with you. Really just want to be able to provide as much support as possible for whatever it is that you need. We have a few minutes left. Otherwise, y'all can just kind of get on about your day. But anyone who has questions about really anything, whether we touched on it or not, specific to this idea of communication and language and students with significant needs, please feel free to, if you want to unmute yourself and just ask the question that way, or if you'd like to put the question in the chat box, feel free. As you're thinking, I will note that Mary put in the chat box earlier, I think we'll be sending this presentation that we're doing right now. We'll be sending that out to you today as well, or tomorrow, so that you will have access to that too. So if there's anything you want to refer back to, that'll be coming at you.
Hi, Ashley. This is Mary. One of the things that I received was a question about how to get started with a student who is not currently demonstrating any perceivable communication. So any thoughts from you and the Patents folks?
I had zero thoughts because I know that I have people who know much more about that than me, so I'm going to turn it directly over to them.
So David had shared a link to our AAC referral process, and this is a really great way, and it's no cost to our public schools. It's a Google form where you just kind of tell us what it is that you are able to see and all the information, and then we match you with at least one, if not several, specialists who will meet with you. Usually we first start out with a meeting and give you some ideas to get started with. We come out and train your staff. We come out and observe the student, whatever needs to happen to help you get started on the right foot, because there are a gazillion right answers. It's just trying to whittle down what are the right answers for your student. Thanks for sharing that again, David.
Sure, it's a great process. I've started with patents November 1st, and Jessica and the previous specialist, they created this resource, and it's a great way to help the stakeholder kind of understand where they are, and then we can take that form, review it, go over it with them, and then provide an initial consultation, give them some solutions to try, and then if we need to, we can follow up on site with an on-site visit. We may involve several other specialists based on the information provided in this consultation referral form. It could be any of our other specialists. In addition to AAC, it could be somebody with blind or low vision, deaf and hard of hearing specialist, or somebody with behavioral experience, or even someone with, if the student has behaviors and issues related to autism. We have 8 specialists that can be involved and help these students. It'd be primarily Jessica and me.
If I could brag on our process a little bit, we just broke our 238th case. So we've been able to reach a lot of students this way. And we have a 100% feedback of like, this actually helped. Like we got what it is that we need to do. So really cool.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really great.
I think one more question, Ashley.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Was just about how to fund devices. How can those potentially be funded?
I think, again, I'll turn it over to my patents friends. They probably have better ideas than I.
So primarily any school-age student has about 4 different avenues to go through. The first one being you could go through insurance or Medicaid. Some students are not eligible to go through that, but they certainly something that we could talk about and help teams figure out if that is available to them. It could be school funded through the provision of FAPE, and usually involves an AT trial, things like that. Could be privately funded through a, GoFundMe or something of that nature, and could also be funded through something like a low-cost loan. For example, Indata and has partnered with a bank to offer low-cost loans. And then, of course, another avenue that some school districts can apply for, aiming for achievement grant. And that grant offers school districts at least one, perhaps more, AAC devices to be funded as part of that, ensuring all students have access to text in their education. So
that's awesome. I knew you'd be able to articulate better than me. That's amazing. I'm writing this down too so that I can sort of include those specifics in future slides about that. Sorry, Mary, go ahead. Was that you?
One more thing, you can also get support from the individual device companies, PRC, Saltillo, Tobii Dynavox. They can also provide extra guidance.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, my experience overall has been that those people are quite willing to help and sort of share experiences and methods of being able to get devices in kids' hands. So that's great. Any other questions have come in, Mary?
No,
Next year, opening soon. That's exciting. Okay.
If you could share those the grant request deadlines with us, and we can also include them in sending this out to not only the folks who are on the call today, but also those who would who registered for the entire series, and they may be viewing some of these office hours later. So it would be good information to be able to share with them in our follow-up.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll try to kind of gather up all those, just any kind of related information here about links to grants and things like that, and sort of beef up some of these slides with these details. This is really good information. Anything, we're sort of approaching the end here. Any other questions that anyone has, any other points that my expert friends on the line want to make sure that we sort of get out to the field as we're gathered here today?
I just think it's pretty clear that it takes a whole village. And, there's a lot of interested helpers in Indiana through all of our EARNs and DOE out there to help kids. And I think it's important just to remember that we work together and yeah, just work together and help these kids.
I could not come up with a better ending. Yes, thank you, David. And Jessica seconds that by saying no one is alone in this. That is so true. We all just really want you guys to know, teachers and administrators on the line, that there's so much support out there. You just have to know where it is and how to get it. So that's why we share about the EARNs. We're all here to help in any way we can. We want to help you support your students in improving their outcomes. So. Yes, Daniel's diving into it. We're all here. We are all here. Truly, we're all so passionate about this, really wanting to improve outcomes for students, each sort of in our own way. So there's definitely people out there ready and willing to help. Just let us know. Yes, and it costs Indiana LEAs nothing. I think that's a critical part. I know funding is such a huge deal with our school districts around the state, but assistance from Project Success, assistance from patents, there's no cost involved. So really, what have you got to lose, you know? We're all here to help. And that, I think, is a great place to end it. If anyone comes up with any questions after the fact, oh gosh, I wish I would have asked that. Project Success contact information is still up on the screen. I know that you can access the contact information for the Patents Friends as well on their website, and then Stephanie's email address, we'll include it in our follow-up email as well, but she can be reached at the DOE for any assessment-specific questions. Other than that, thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you found this time useful, and we will look forward to working with you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.